Hey Optimancers, Chris here. The Tal'Dorei campaign setting Reborn from Critical Role is now available on D&D Beyond, and I've covered all 9 subclasses in that supplement. And now let's finish this series by going over the 7 unique feats available to player characters in that book. And I'm just going to go through them in the order they're presented. The first is Cruel. So, not a heroic feat, to be sure. The character who takes this feat gets Cruelty dice, which are d6s. The character gets a number of dice equal to their proficiency bonus and recovers them after long rest. They spend no more than 1 cruelty die on any given turn. They have 3 options for spending the dice. The first is just straight damage. So you roll your damage, you roll the cruelty die, and then you add it to the total. The second is when you score a critical hit, you can spend 1 cruelty die to gain temporary hit points equal to the roll. And the third is when you make a charisma intimidation check, you can roll the die and add it to the result. So, the obvious feat to compare this to is Martial Adept. This feat from the player's handbook gives you a d6 superiority die that you can spend to fuel one of 2 maneuvers that you pick from the Battlemaster subclass. So Cruel gives you proficiency bonus per long rest dice, and Martial Adept is 1 die per short or long rest. If we look at more recent rules updates, a lot of features that used to be once per short rest have been replaced with proficiency bonus per long rest. So, I suppose, in theory, they are supposed to be roughly equivalent. Though, personally, I'll take the one that scales with your level. But the real difference lies in the power level of the cruelty die versus the superiority die. If we consider a cruelty die allows us to add the d6 to damage, well, with the maneuver, we often add the die to damage as a rider to another effect, whether it be frightening the target, adding a reaction attack, gaining advantage, or increasing our reach. If we look at the other 2 options, they just aren't impressive. A d6 to a single type of ability check, or adding 3 or 4 temporary hit points at a moment where you probably do want to spend the d6 on damage to at least double it up. Now, if Martial Adept was a strong feat, this still might be a passable feat. But Martial Adept is generally considered not strong at all, and Cruel is just plain disappointing. Our second feat is Flash Recall. This feat allows you to have the spellcasting feature from a class that prepares spells. So from our official selections, that would be the Wizard, Artificer, Paladin, Cleric, and Druid. The feat is pretty simple. Once per short or long rest, you can use a bonus action to prepare a spell available to you for preparation, replacing another spell you had prepared of equal or higher level. So the reason you might want this feat are for situational or circumstantial spells. So, for example, let's say you're a cleric and you find yourself in a situation where you need to communicate with a creature that you don't share a language. Well, this feat would allow you to use a bonus action and switch one of your 3rd level or higher prepared spells for the tongue spell. Probably not a spell you prepare regularly, but it's the spell you need for that situation. Speaking of clerics, another possible use of this spell would be to prepare a spell like Divination. This is a great ritual that allows the cleric to ask a question of the DM without expending a spell slot since it's a ritual. But the issue is, you probably don't want to cast a spell more than once per long rest. So what you could do is prepare Divination, cast it ritually when you have the opportunity, then you could use this feature to switch it out for another spell of 4th level or lower afterwards. Here's another possible use. Let's say you use all your 3rd level slots. Well, then you could switch out one of your 3rd level prepared spells for a ritual spell that won't use any additional slots. Now, if you're a wizard, the value of this spell will vary, depending on how many unprepared, non-ritual spells you have in your spellbook. I often find that's not many, in which case this feat will be a letdown for you. But if you're in a campaign where your spellbook is getting filled with spells beyond your standard 2 per level, this will have more value. Regardless though, this isn't a feat I'd probably take on pretty much any character or recommend. Yes, it will come in handy from time to time, but the cost here, it's just too high. Like, if I'm a cleric, do I want this feat to switch out 1 prepared spell, or do I just want a +2 wisdom and prepare 1 more spell to begin with, plus the bonus to spell attacks and spell DC, the latter of which is probably more valuable than any prepared spell anyways, as well as anything else that's based on wisdom. And that's just taking the flat +2 ability score boost, which also probably isn't your best use of an ability score increase. I want to get Warcaster and Resilient Constitution and raise my wisdom. And then I'm 19th level before I have any extra ability score increases. In order for me to be choosing something else, it has to be really good or really work for my build. And this feat isn't of that level of value. So I think this is more powerful than Cruel, but still not powerful enough to recommend. Next up is Mystic Conflux, which gives you a special understanding of magical items, giving you 2 benefits. First, you can attune up to 4 magic items, and second, you can cast Identify spell once per long rest without expending a spell slot or material components. So the second part of this feat is crappy. Identify is a ritual spell, so if you have it, you probably aren't spending spell slots on it anyways, and the material component is a one-time cost, and then you're good to cast a spell as often as you like, with no once per long rest restriction, and Identify isn't even all that great a spell. If you're willing to wait through your next short rest, you can generally identify magic items without the Identify spell anyways. And the Dungeon Master's Guide specifies that this spell doesn't even reveal magic item curses, which is a bit of a dirty trick, to not mention that little limitation here in the spell description. Which leaves us with the extra attunement. Now that, depending on your level and the type of campaign you're in, could be well worth taking this feat. Like, imagine for a moment you're playing in a campaign where you've reached higher levels and magic items are flowing like water. Maybe not in your campaign. I know, trust me, I feel you. But some viewers are in such a campaign right now, or, like myself, have been in these kinds of campaigns from time to time. So you've got your Paladin, and you have a Belt of Giant Strength, and a Holy Avenger Longsword, and a Rod of Absorption, and everyone else in the party is decked out too. And then, lo and behold, you find an Ion Stone of Mastery. Is it worth a feat to get a +1 proficiency bonus? Yes, 100% yes. Would I ever consider this in a campaign that wasn't magic item heavy? No, never. I should also note that you never want to take this with your Artificer, because neither this feat nor the Artificer's 10th level feature give you +1 attunement slot. They both give you a flat 4, so they aren't going to stack with each other. And then this feat becomes Identify once per day. So most of the time, no. But in certain cases, yes to this feat. I would recommend Mystic Conflux, and I'll let you figure out which is which. Let's move on to Remarkable Recovery, which, as the name suggests, boosts your character's ability to recover from wounds. First, you're going to increase your Constitution score by 1, so what we have here is a half feat. When you are successfully stabilized while dying, you regain hit points equal to your Constitution modifier with a minimum of 1. And whenever you regain hit points as a result of a spell, potion, or class feature, but not from the last bullet point, you gain an additional amount of hit points equal to your Constitution modifier. So, just to start out with, my standards for half feats are considerably lower than my standards for full feats. So if you're sitting on an even Constitution score, keep looking. But if you're sitting on an odd Constitution score, then this will bump you up to the next modifier increase. So let's start out with a third bullet point. Your Constitution modifier is +5 at most, but more likely +3 or so. For most healing effects, this isn't going to be a huge percentage increase. And I can't help but notice this doesn't boost all forms of healing. Like if you regain hit points because somebody with a healer feat heals you, well, that's not a spell, a potion, or a class feature, so you get no bonus. But we have to go back to the classic question. What about Goodberry? Well, if you eat a Goodberry, I'd say that's regaining a hit point as a result of a spell, so you should get the bonus. I mean, I've always personally been iffy about the interaction between a Life Cleric's Disciple of Life and Goodberry, and yes, I am aware that Sage Advice says it works, but the way I read the feature, it doesn't read like indirect healing should work. But here, the wording doesn't seem to imply that direct healing is required. So if you eat a Goodberry and you regain a hit point, that's obviously a result of casting Goodberry, so as far as I read it, it should apply. And of course, there's Aura Vitality or the regeneration spell. Each time they heal you, you should get the bonus. So you get it over and over again for the same spell. So there are certain interactions that can make the third bullet point here really good, but if you don't use those interactions, then you're going to find the bonus fairly minor. And back to the second bullet point. So if you don't like the yo-yo effect of a character dropping to 0 hit points and then being brought back up with a healing word, well, at least that expends spell slots, because with this, a healing kit, even without the healer feat, or a spare the dying cantrip, can bring you back up to conscious. No spell required. Now, what's not 100% clear to me is whether this applies if you stabilize by making your 3 death saving throws. I'm leaning towards it not working because stabilized generally would suggest somebody else stabilized you. Anyways, I'm not leaning over backwards to take this feat on just any character. But if I'm playing a character that has, number 1, an odd constitution score, number 2, I'm considering a half feat anyways, number 3, my character takes a lot of damage and has a way to benefit from Goodberry or other multiple instances of healing type spells, then yeah, I'd consider this feat for sure. On to Spelldriver. So this one has a pretty significant prerequisite. You must be 11th level or higher and have the spellcasting or pack magic feature. So I read this feat and all I can think of is Baldur's Gate 3 and Misty Step. So if you are unaware, in Baldur's Gate 3, a spellcaster can cast Misty Step using their bonus action and still cast a leveled spell with their action, which is normally not allowed in 5th edition, and players seem to love it. Well, here you go. You cast a bonus action spell of 1st level or higher, and you can cast an action spell of 1st level or higher in the same turn, only one of which can be a 3rd level or higher spell. So the obvious spell is Misty Step. As a 2nd level spell, it won't restrict the level of spell you cast with your action, and combining Misty Step with a leveled spell with your action makes Misty Step a whole lot better. And of course, there's also Quicken Spell Metamagic. So you could cast an action spell and combine it with another action spell, though only one can be 3rd level or higher. And of course, only one can require concentration, so consider that as well. Here's one more thing to consider. This does not work with bonus action cantrips. So I know it doesn't matter how many times I repeat this rule. Even in comments to my videos where I've spelled out the rule, some of my viewers continue to get it wrong, but here it is again. This is the rule. If you cast a spell with your bonus action, any other spell you cast on your turn can only be a cantrip. The rule is not if you cast a leveled spell with your bonus action, it's if you cast any spell with your bonus action. As in, you cast Shillelagh, a cantrip, with your bonus action. Any other spell you cast on your turn can only be a cantrip, even though that bonus action spell was also a cantrip. Honest, I promise, look it up yourself. This feat does not fix that interaction. It says when you use your bonus action to cast a spell of 1st level or higher. So if you do cast Shillelagh or Magic Stone, which are cantrips with your bonus action, you're stuck with cantrips for your action as well. There's another interaction this feat does not fix. So let's say you cast Misty Step with your bonus action, and then you cast your big spell with your action. Let's say a polymorph. And then it gets counterspelled. And you want to counterspell that counterspell. Well, you can't. Because when you cast a spell as a bonus action, any other spell cast on your turn can only be a cantrip. And this feat only bypasses that for your action, not for your reaction. So all that considered, would I recommend this feat? Yeah. I mean, if you're a spellcaster that relies on Misty Step for bonus action teleportation, then this is going to be really good. Now, if you're an Eladrin, Astral Elf, or Shadow Kai, then you don't need to cast a spell to teleport as a bonus action. But for other spellcasters, freeing up that action to cast a leveled spell is going to be a big deal. And it's not like you're low level and scrambling for feats to protect concentration anymore. You're 11th level or higher to qualify for this feat. I was considering if I was a sorcerer and had Quicken Spell, what one action 1st level or 2nd level spells do I want to quicken and then combine with a higher level spell? And I would generally consider that we probably want our concentration for the higher level spell. Well, I could see bonus action Mirror Image being really good, or bonus action Tasha's Mind Whip being really good. So I think there are some good options there as well. So yeah, if this feat was available at lower levels, I don't know that I would jump at it, but at 11th level or higher, I'd definitely consider this. Next up is Thrown Arms Master. So I guess I got to start off by saying I want to be clear that thrown melee weapons are pretty weak in 5th edition. If you actually want to optimize a thrown weapon build, you're basically restricted to the dart, which has a unique combination of being a thrown weapon that is also a ranged weapon, meaning it qualifies for sharpshooter. All other thrown weapons do not qualify for sharpshooter. But throwing melee weapons can occasionally be useful. It's just a hard concept to optimize. It does look promising. That's going to change with the 2024 Player's Handbook, but we're not there yet. So, Thrown Arms Master is a half feat, allowing you to increase your strength or dexterity by 1. So as I mentioned before, with half feats, I don't expect the same power as a full feat, obviously. So if a +1 strength or dexterity isn't significant to your character, then this is an obvious pass. We start with giving all melee weapons without the thrown property the ability to be thrown. A one-handed weapon has a normal range of 20 feet and a long range of 60, which is fairly standard for a thrown weapon. I assume this includes weapons with the versatile property. And two-handed weapons have a normal range of 15 feet and a long range of 30 feet. Now, throwing your glaive might sound cool. Just keep in mind that you just threw away your glaive. And unless you have the movement to go pick it up again after throwing it, that could be a problem. Like, I could see throwing it at a flying enemy above your reach and then you go pick it up afterwards, but just be aware that if you throw it again using extra attack, you won't have another interaction to pick it up again. Well, your enemies might have that interaction on their turns and pick up your weapon, and now you just lost your weapon. Second bullet. Weapons with the thrown property have their short range increased by 20 feet and their long range increased by 40 feet. Now this is significant because I know of no other way to increase a range of a thrown weapon. And unless you're using the aforementioned dart, I also don't know of any way to throw beyond short range without the disadvantage that imparts. I mean, you might be able to offset it with advantage, but then you lose that advantage. And the short range of thrown weapons is usually 20 feet, and this doubles that. Only the javelin has more, with 30 feet, so an additional 20 feet on top of that, it's still a big increase. But don't misunderstand me. This is significant, but it doesn't make thrown weapons a particularly optimizable tactic in 5th edition. Finally, when you miss with a thrown weapon using a light weapon, the weapon returns to your grasp at the end of your turn, and you can catch and stow any weapon you threw this way. Do not confuse or conflate this with magical returning weapons. This is nowhere near as good as that. So if you're trying to optimize thrown weapons the best you can, and you don't get the returning weapon infusion from Artificer or another magical returning weapon, well, you're in trouble because you throw your magic weapon and it's gone. And now unless you have a whole lot of magical throwing weapons, you're pretty much boned if you're fighting anything with resistance or immunity to attacks with non-magical weapons. And as we know, as you go up in levels, that becomes more and more common. If this feat allowed you to bypass a multiple level Artificer dip, that would be a big deal. But it really doesn't, because the restrictions here are just too great. First, if you hit with a weapon, it does not return. And second, even if you miss, it doesn't return until the end of your turn, so you can't use the same weapon with extra attack. So this third bullet point, it just doesn't solve the problem. Now if you're playing with house rules or something that make thrown weapons more viable, then the second bullet point here alone might be worth considering this feat. Otherwise, thrown weapons just end up being that thing that martial melee characters do when they can't make melee attacks. And this isn't going to make them much more impressive. So I wouldn't normally recommend this one. And last, but certainly not least, Vital Sacrifice. We all know Matt Mercer just loves his blood magic. And why restrict it to just classes and multiple subclasses? Let's have a blood magic feat too. So let's just go over this before I discuss it. When you have this feat, you can take a bonus action to get a blood boon. When you do so, you take a d6 necrotic damage, and that damage can't be reduced in any way. Your blood boon lasts for 1 hour or until you expend it. If you expend it, you have 3 options and ways it can benefit you. First, if you make an attack roll, you can add a d6 to the total. Second, if you hit with an attack or spell, you deal 2d6 necrotic damage as well. Third, if you cause a creature to make a strength, dexterity, or constitution saving throw, you can reduce their result by a d4. Okay, so that's the feat. Let's discuss. First off, there's some iffy wording. Like here it says, when you hit with an attack or spell. What do they mean, hit with a spell? I mean, normally if a spell requires it to hit roll, it's a spell attack. So it's already an attack. No reason for the or spell wording here. Or maybe they mean if you affect somebody with a spell, like you cast Fireball. But hit isn't normally the wording we would use for Fireball. Hit is a wording normally reserved for attacks, as in you rolled a hit, and if you meet or exceed their armor class, you hit. Fireball doesn't do that. So I'm not sure what this means. Maybe saving throw-based spells apply, and maybe they don't. And if they do, then obviously this is more significant a boost for an area of effect spell that hits multiple targets, as you'd apply the extra damage to all of them. Next is the wording here. You expend the blood boon and add a d6 to your attack roll. Is that before you know if it otherwise would have hit? Or can you add it after your DM announces that you missed with your attack? The value of this feature is higher if you can apply the bonus after the miss is announced. Personally, I lean towards the bonus being applied here after the roll is made but before the results are announced, as that language that often appears of potentially turning the miss into a hit is missing, meaning this should probably be applied before it's determined if the attack hit. But you could read it either way or run it either way, I think. The same goes for this here. Is the d4 subtracted before their roll or after? I'm not sure. And finally, as a bonus action, you can choose to take a d6 necrotic damage to gain a blood boon. What if you already have a blood boon? Do you get another? Can you build them up between combats and enter combat with a whole stack of these? Very possibly, but it's not 100% clear. What I will say is that even with the most conservative reading of this feat possible, this is good. And it is stunning to me that this feat and Cruel, the first feat we covered, are in the same book. This is usable more often, and the benefits are just better. I mean, compare an extra 2d6 damage. Is that better than an extra 1d6 damage? I mean, of course it is. And yes, you do take some damage, but not a lot. And with an hour to expend the blood boons, you have lots of opportunity to heal up that damage. And all 3 bullet points here are good. There is no weak option here. And in theory, there's no hard limit on the number of times you can use this per long rest. It's really only limited by your ability to heal the damage. And if you can build up multiple blood boons at once, then this is bonkers. For DMs out there, I would highly recommend limiting blood boons to 1 at a time, because although that doesn't prevent player characters from using this over and over in a single combat, because it's just using their bonus action, at least they're taking the damage at a point where it matters more. But for players, yeah, easily the strongest feat in this book. Regardless of the interpretations, this is an easy pick. And that's it. I've now covered all the Tal'Dorei stuff, and I've created a playlist of all the subclasses along with this video if you need to reference it in the future. Otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.